Imagine you are 5 years old. You live in an orphanage in Iowa. It is January 1939. A kind-looking woman with a notebook calls your name and walks you into a small, quiet room. She smiles. She tells you that the grown-ups have been listening to the way you speak, and they have noticed something. Something is wrong with the way you talk. You need to be careful. You need to try harder. You need to fix it before it gets worse. You have always spoken normally. You have never struggled with a single word in your life. But the woman is an adult and you are 5, so you believe her. By the end of that year, you will have stopped speaking almost entirely. This was the monster study. It is one of the cruelest experiments in the history of American science, and the man who designed it had been chasing one question for as long as he could remember. His name was Wendell Johnson. He had grown up on a farm in Kansas, and he had stuttered from the day he learned to speak. Not a soft stumble, a severe body-shaking stutter. Strangers turned away from him. Teachers gave up on him. By the time he reached university, he had read every book on speech disorders he could find, and he had decided that none of them knew what they were talking about. The scientific consensus in 1930s America was simple. Stuttering was inborn, a defect in the brain or the bloodline. Nothing could be done about it. And Johnson refused to live with that idea. Because if it was true, then his entire painful childhood had been the unspooling of a sentence handed to him at birth. There would have been no escape. So, he proposed something almost no one else dared to suggest. What if, he asked, stuttering is not born? What if it is taught? His theory went like this. A child is speaking normally. Some well-meaning adult notices a small hesitation, a half-second pause, the kind of thing every child does. The adult points it out. They worry out loud. The child begins to listen to themselves. They begin to dread their own next word. The dread produces the stumble. The stumble confirms the dread. And on it goes, year after year, until that child is 25 years old and cannot say his own name in front of a stranger. He called it the diagnosogenic theory. The disease begins with the diagnosis. To prove it, he would need to do something almost no scientist had ever been willing to do. He would need to take a perfectly healthy child and make her sick. In 1939, he found the place to do it. The Iowa Soldiers' Orphans' Home in Davenport, a state institution full of children whose parents had died or vanished or simply walked away. The orphanage routinely let university researchers study its wards. Nobody asked the children for permission. Nobody could. Johnson did not run the experiment himself. He handed it to his graduate, a 23-year-old named Mary Tudor. She was bright, she was eager, she was new. Johnson gave her a script and a list of 22 children, and he sent her into the orphanage to read it. She divided the children into 4 groups. Some already stuttered. Some did not. Half of each group would be encouraged. The other half would be told their speech was failing. The group that mattered most to Johnson was small. 6 children who spoke completely normally, and who would be told by an adult they trusted that they were beginning to stutter. 5 girls, 1 boy. The youngest was 5. The oldest was 15. Mary Tudor sat across from each of them, one at a time, in a quiet room. She opened her notebook, she smiled, and she read the words Johnson had written. She told them the staff had been listening. She told them they were beginning to stutter. She told them they had to try harder. She told them to listen carefully to themselves and stop the next word before it slipped. She came back week after week all that spring. Each time she reminded them. Each time she warned them. Each time the children believed her, because in 1939, in an orphanage in a small room with a woman holding a notebook, what choice did they have? Within weeks the changes began. Norma Jean, the 5-year-old who had once been chatty and unguarded, started covering her mouth when she spoke. By the 2nd month she was hiding from the staff when she was called on to read aloud. By the end of the experiment she was almost completely silent. Betty, 8, refused to speak in class. The teacher said the girl who had always raised her hand now sat with her head down. Her grades collapsed. Hazel, 12, started talking with her hand pressed against her lips. Mary Kolaski, 11, stopped speaking at meals. Clarence, 6, would freeze in the middle of a sentence, start over, and freeze again. None of them had done any of this in January. Mary Tudor watched it happen. She had been told this was a controlled study. She had been told the labels would have no effect. She wrote in her notes very quietly that she was beginning to worry the children were not always being understood. That sentence is in the archives. You can still read it. If you're still here, take 2 seconds and hit subscribe, because what comes next is the part almost nobody knows, and there are more of these waiting on this channel. When the spring semester ended, Tudor packed up and went back to the university. But the children stayed and the labels stayed in them. Over the next year, on her own time, Tudor came back. She told them she had been wrong. She told them they did not have a stutter. She told them they could speak. They listened politely and said almost nothing in return. Some of them never spoke normally again. Johnson published a short paper referencing the data indirectly and buried the rest. The other speech researchers at Iowa knew. They whispered about it in the halls. Among themselves, they started calling it the monster study. That name was not Johnson's. It was a verdict from his own colleagues, made quietly enough that it stayed inside the building for 60 years. The children grew up carrying a story about themselves that no one had ever told them was false, that they were broken, that something was wrong with the way they spoke. They lived their whole adult lives believing it. A building at the University of Iowa was named after Johnson. The turtles sat in cardboard boxes nobody opened. In 2001, a reporter named Jim Dyer pulled those boxes off the shelf. He tracked down the survivors, now in their 60s and 70s. He published the story. Iowa apologized in 2003. In 2007, the state paid $925,000 to 6 survivors who sued. But the money wasn't what they came for. After 60 years, they came for an explanation. They learned that nothing had been wrong with them. They had been told they were broken when they were 5 years old. And the story they had carried about themselves for the rest of their lives was a script a 23-year-old graduate student had read out of a notebook. Most people walk away from this story thinking the lesson is about ethics. That's the easy lesson. The harder one is this. Telling a small child they are broken when they are not is itself a kind of breaking. The label does not have to be accurate to install itself. It only has to come from someone the child cannot refuse. Once it is in, it stays. You did not get to choose either. Somewhere in your first 10 years, adults told you who you were, smart or slow, quiet or too loud. Most of them were not even paying attention, but the labels went in and there was no part of them old enough to push back and the labels stayed. If a sentence in this video made you flinch, tell me which one in the comments, and if you've ever felt like this, drop a like, because we are all carrying somebody's notebook.